Welcome to Ask Leo Answercast number 160. I'm Leo Notenboom, and I'll be answering questions that you've been asking out at AskLeo.com. Today I'll ask you to stay with me to the end of the podcast where I have a very short announcement. Today's Answercast is brought to you by me, Ask Leo. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that I often promote my own products here, hoping that you'll find them useful and in purchasing them help to support Ask Leo. And of course, I'm exceptionally grateful when you do so. Another way you can help that doesn't cost you a penny and honestly really does help Ask Leo is to share it. Tell a friend about Ask Leo. Encourage them to subscribe to the newsletter. Share Ask Leo links on social media and elsewhere on the web. It all really does help. That's AskLeo.com. Thank you. Hi, Leo. My problem is this. My main drive failed today. It doesn't seem to be spinning. There is power going to it as the light flashes for a few seconds. The error message is to install the boot media, and in the BIOS, the hard drive is not even showing. It's just the C drive, and all of my important stuff is on my external drives, which I do back up regularly. Hence, I'll be replacing it soon. However, the computer only came with recovery disks. I've already tried reformatting the new drive using the recovery disk, but it just keeps going back to the Windows is loading files screen. I changed a hard drive a few years ago, but I had a startup disk to boot from. This machine does not have a boot disk. It's Windows 7. And if I remember correctly, my other replacement used Windows XP. You might be in a bit of a pickle. There are a number of things I glean from your question, and most of them are bad news. There's one bit of hope, however, depending on what you mean by something. When you say you back up regularly, how is that done? If you're doing a full system image backup, which is what I recommend folks do, at least periodically, then to put it bluntly, you're golden. You can replace the drive, boot from the backup software rescue media, restore the image backup, and you'll be off and running. But it all depends on exactly how you're backing up. Now, if you're not doing that, then the news is really more grim. If the disk isn't spinning, then it's dead. Dead, dead, dead. You can't reformat a drive that doesn't spin. Fact is, you can't even recover data from a drive that doesn't spin. A data recovery service perhaps could, but you and I cannot. That hard drive is, for all practical purposes, now just a brick. That's a problem because most of the recovery disks, like the ones you seem to have, rely on a pristine copy of the operating system that's stored on a hidden partition on that disk. On that disk that's no longer working. That means that the recovery disks you have in your hand have no chance of working. They need the disk to be working to some degree. And as I said, if it ain't spinning, it's dead. You have two options. Some manufacturers will send you a true installation disk if you contact them with this problem. Some will only do it, of course, if you've actually gotten the replacement hard drive from them. But regardless, contact the manufacturer of your computer or the retailer from where you bought it and see what options they're willing to provide. You could get lucky. If you don't, then you're faced with only one real option. Get the installation media yourself. In your case, that means purchasing a copy of Windows 7 Retail and installing it from scratch once the drive has been replaced. Of course, you can also consider another operating system like Linux at the time, since it's free. But to get back to something close to where you started, you'll need a Windows installation disk. And may I strongly recommend that you start a periodic image backup of your machine to avoid disasters like this again in the future. Leo, my email address is something@msn.com. But when my friend sends me an email, they say there is another name next to my email address. It's very confusing. How can I find this fake name, and how can I change it to my real name? If you send me an email, you'll find out what I mean. Actually, if I send you an email, I probably won't see what you mean because I don't think the problem is at your end or even a problem that you specifically can control. we have to start by understanding how email addresses and names are used. When an email is addressed, there are two parts. The actual email address, which is not optional, that specifies the actual recipient of the email. There's also a display name, which is meant to be the human readable equivalent, the name of that recipient. This part's actually optional, so it's perfectly valid to send email with only an email address. So where does the display name come from? Well, one place it comes from is when you configure your email account in your email program or when you set up your email account with an online service. At that time, you actually specify both your name and your email address, or you're given your email address, but nonetheless, you specify your name. Then, when you send email, your email program then puts those two together. It uses your name and then typically follows that with your email address in angle brackets as the from line in the email that you send. So on outgoing email, you define what the display name is simply by how you've configured your email account. The display name is actually completely ignored by the entire email system. It has nothing to do with getting your email from point A to point B. It's just there kind of as a courtesy for the recipient to know who the email came from without needing to know the specific email address. They can then add that to their contact list or address book, and both the name and the email address are added. Sometimes email programs will even do this for you, adding the address book entry automatically. When you send an email to someone that's in your contact list, the email program does kind of the same thing. It gets the email address, of course, from the contact list, but it also gets the name that's associated with that email address. It then formats the to or the CC or the BCC line with, once again, the display name followed by the email address in angle brackets. Now, you may not always see this because sometimes email programs will hide what they're doing and show you only the display name. But here's the key. Since the display name is completely ignored by the email system, there's nothing that says the email address actually has to match the name. You could, in fact, go into your address book and change the name of one of your contacts to be Santa Claus. And that's what it would show as, the display name, when you send email to that email address. This is actually true for most email programs. The specifics of how you actually make this happen can vary a little bit. So, one strong possibility is that your friend who's sending you email has you in his email address book with the wrong name. He needs to change his address book or clear his email program's suggestions or autocomplete entries. Now, how did you end up in his address book with the wrong name? It's really hard to say, but I've got one hunch. Spam. Spammers fake the from line all the time, and in doing so, they typically mismatch the email addresses and the names. Look at your spam sometimes, and you'll see that the from lines rarely have names that seem to match their email addresses. So here's my theory. Your friend got some spam. That spam looked like it came from your email address, but with a different name. You had nothing to do with it. It was just spam. For one reason or another, your friend's email program remembered it, either automatically adding it to his contact list or some kind of autocomplete or auto-suggestion list. And he's the one that'll need to clean it out. Leo, on the topic of can my boss see my mail and instant messages, you wrote, if using your company's machine, it's safe to assume that your boss or IT department could see your emails and instant messages. Yes, but there may be an additional cautionary note in my opinion. My son and daughter-in-law are both faculty members at a major university. They have their own privately owned computer at home. However, at home, they use their university faculty email addresses to send and receive email. So isn't it true that it's not who owns the machine, but the use of the university's email system, on campus or at home, that opens the door to this kind of access vulnerability? Actually, it's both. Or rather, it's either and more. Let me explain what I mean. My original article discussed using company-provided or company-owned hardware like a PC. The issue here, of course, is that when the company provides hardware like this, it's possible, and often quite legal, for them to install software or even hardware that enables them to monitor how that computer is being used. That most certainly could include software to monitor everything from your keystrokes to what you see on the screen. And of course, it could include then any email you send and receive, as well as instant messages or more. Basically, when you're provided a computer by someone else, there's really no way to know that they haven't installed virtually undetectable monitoring tools. And companies have been known to do exactly that. In another article, I actually mentioned that your ISP can see anything you do. The company that provides your internet connection can, if they have an inclination, monitor the traffic that travels up and down the connection that they've provided to you. It's much like an open Wi-Fi hotspot in that regard, except that your ISP has the legitimate means to do it. So even when you're at work or at school using your own computer or other equipment that you know is secure, if you're using your work or your school's internet, then absolutely they could monitor what's going back and forth on that connection. I'll talk a little bit about how to mitigate at least some of that in a second. Finally, and the point that you make, is that the provider of basically any online service that you use can monitor how you use that service. That means that, yes, your email provider can read your email. If that email provider is your school, by virtue of having an email address based on that school's internet domain, then yes, the school's IT department could be looking at what you send and receive. But really, it's true for each and every email service provider and each and every other online service provider. They could be looking. Now, one of the things that I've long said that, to be honest, few people seem to take to heart is that in general, you and I just aren't that interesting. Your ISP, your school, your company, your email provider, they typically have much better things to do with their time and resources than to spend it snooping on your correspondence. Typically. Now, of course, if there is a reason for them to look, well, they can. But as I said, most of us just aren't that interesting. So, what can you do if you think you are interesting? When it comes to using someone else's hardware, not much. When you're at work, don't do anything on your work computer that isn't something you'd want your boss or others to know about. As for the rest, ISPs, email, and service providers, it really all comes down to encryption of some sort. If you use a VPN service, then your internet provider can't see what you're up to other than the fact that you're connected to a VPN. And of course, remember that the VPN service then can see everything you do. Encrypting email, on the other hand, is difficult but possible. And that's really the only way to keep your email provider, and don't forget the email provider used by the recipient, from being able to read your messages. I have a desktop computer with Windows 7 pre-installed. It won't start up. It's asking me for the installation disk, which I don't have. Can I buy that somewhere? Do I have to buy Windows 7 and install that, or can I just buy Windows 8.1 now and install that? There are a few things you can try. I'll list those, as well as one technique that will let you avoid this problem completely in the future. First, contact the computer manufacturer or the retailer that sold you the machine. It's very common that machines not come with installation disks these days, much as I would prefer it otherwise. However, there are certain things that can happen that absolutely require an installation disk. Some, though not all, manufacturers will provide that disk, perhaps for a small fee, should you need it. Yes, it is still possible to purchase Windows 7, but there are a couple of problems. One is that I believe you need to resort to the secondary market, to sites like eBay and such, to get it. So you'll need to be particularly careful of who it is you're dealing with to make the purchase. Second, depending on the issue that you're facing, it's possible that it still won't help. What you would probably buy is Windows 7 Retail. What you probably have on your machine, however, is Windows 7 OEM. The retail disk will work for some issues, but not for others. While technically against the license terms, you can try to purchase an OEM disk, but be careful to purchase an OEM disk for your computer or at least for your computer's manufacturer. A Windows OEM disk for an HP computer, for example, probably won't help if you've got a Sony. Now, it is possible that you don't need an installation disk. One thing you can try is to boot from a system repair or recovery disk. Those may have been provided with your system. If it has been, it may be able to repair the system from a pristine copy that's typically kept on a hidden partition. You may also be able to reinstall Windows using this disk, but I do have a couple of caveats about reinstalling, which I'll get to in a second. Now, you can certainly reinstall Windows 7 from a retail disk. If your machine meets the minimum requirements for Windows 8, you could certainly install that. You need to plan, however, on these installs actually erasing everything that's currently on your hard drive. If that's painful, then you should take an image backup first. You can do that with, for example, Macrium Reflect's free edition. You'll need to use another computer to download Macrium Reflect and then burn the rescue disk. But you can then boot from that rescue disk and actually back up your system to an external disk. You can then recover your data from that backup later after your system has been reinstalled and is working. Finally, and since we're talking about backup software, I need to point out two things. First, if you'd been backing up regularly, none of this would have been an issue. You could simply restore your machine to a backup image taken before it started asking for the install disk. Second, backup images are actually my strongly recommended antidote for not getting installation media. As soon as you get a working system, be it a rebuild as the case here, or when you get a brand new one, take a complete system image. Save that somewhere. Heck, back it up. Then, if you ever need to start over for any reason, you can simply restore your machine to that image. My aunt just bought a Mac and it seems to have no optical drive. I've not been there to see the computer, although I had the same reaction to the floppy drives disappearing and have not used them for years. But I switched to CDRs and now DVD-Rs for mostly backups. How do you buy software? Not everything can be done on flash and downloads. Is having broadband required for today's Macs? Windows 8, it was optional. Doesn't anyone still worry about the main hard drive failure anymore? My PC is backed up onto DVDs, including 6 recovery DVDs for Windows 8. The scenario you describe is now very, very common. In fact, none of the 3 Macs in this household have optical drives, and neither does my Microsoft Surface Pro running Windows 8. But it's not really a problem. I'll explain why and what I do. It's probably safe to say that the days of the optical drive may be coming to a close. Not this week, not this year, perhaps even not this decade, but I think the writing is on the wall. Regardless of its future, it's simply a fact that machines are more commonly coming without a CD or DVD or Blu-ray drive. Software companies are absolutely moving towards more and more online delivery. Yep, they're assuming connectivity. I know that can be frustrating for those that have poor, slow, no, or metered connections, but it is what it is. For my Mac Pro, I've never had any form of optical media for the operating system. It was pre-installed, and the updates, often very large, are delivered via download. As I said, the same is now true for my Surface Pro as well. There are 2 directions that I think people need to consider. One is to start phasing out the use of optical media for backup. Period. Backing up your system to optical disks is already incredibly unwieldy simply because of the number of disks that it takes. But optical disks, especially the ones that you're able to write to, are actually known to have a limited shelf life. What that translates to is that your backups may not be there when you need them. Instead, it's time to move to things like external hard drives or SSDs or other larger format devices. All of my backups are to external drives and, to a much lesser extent, to the cloud. But what about those disks that you have? Well, actually, there's an easy solution for that as well. Get an external USB optical drive. I happen to have an external CD/DVD burner which can also read Blu-ray discs. It works great. I don't use it very often, but it's quite handy to have around. And yes, if you configure your PC to boot from USB, it can typically boot from a USB optical drive. If what you really care about is data, then it's also potentially an argument for keeping an older machine around. An older machine with an optical drive that you can read from, connected to your local area network, can make all of your old CDs and DVDs accessible to any machine you have. I have a Gmail account that I've never used. Because my phone is now a Samsung 3 and it interfaces with Gmail, I'm thinking of dropping my Yahoo account. The problem is that when I go into my Gmail account, I find mail from Amazon to a lady in Florida with the same first name as me. I don't understand what's happened, why, when I enter my name and password, I see emails to her about stuff that she's ordered on Amazon. Her name and address are there as well. When I look in all mail, I see about 1,300 emails, which I had planned to delete and start up with Gmail because it's the browser for my Samsung Galaxy. I don't know who to ask about these emails from Amazon to this other woman in Florida regarding her purchases, and again, I have signed into my Gmail account with my name and password. So now I'm afraid to start up a Gmail account and drop off my old email address. Thanks, Leo, for any light that you can shed on this problem. I've actually got a pretty good guess as to what's going on. I also have some ideas and some advice for what you might want to do about it. You know, I'm constantly amazed at the number of times people type in their own email address and get it wrong. It's one of the reasons you see so many sites forcing you to type it in twice. It's annoying as heck to have to do so, and I've resisted forcing people to do so with Ask Leo, but as a result, I'll say that roughly 1 out of every 50 questions submitted includes a bad email address. What that means is that when I take the time to reply, that reply bounces. That's also kind of frustrating. Anyway, I'll bet that's exactly what's happened here. My guess is that the lady in Florida typed in the wrong email address when she set up her Amazon account. Or perhaps she changed the email address associated with her Amazon account at some point and put it wrong then. I'm somewhat surprised that Amazon let this through, since normally the first thing a service does is require that the email address be confirmed by sending it a message that requires some sort of action. But ultimately, there's a lady in Florida that's not getting her Amazon notifications. Now, on the off chance that I'm wrong, I would change the password on the Gmail account. I also make sure that the security information on the account is what you expect it to be. I don't think the Florida woman is accessing the account, especially if you don't see anything in the sent mail that isn't yours. But better safe than sorry. And after having done this, I'd actually have no problems using the account. The question is, what to do about Amazon? Now, you've got several options. You could reply to one of those emails, or even contact Amazon customer service and explain the problem to them. I'm sure that this isn't the first time they've had this problem. They may even have some way of resolving it themselves. Or you could drop the lady in Florida a note. You do have her mailing address after all. Now, I do need to point out one thing that's particularly scary. Now, to be clear, it's not scary for you. You're fine. But it is scary for the lady in Florida. And it's another reason why it's so darned important to always double-check your email address when you give it to anyone. You could probably gain access to this lady's Amazon account. Since the emails are being sent to you, it means that an "I forgot my password" reset link would presumably also get sent to you. Using that, you could change the password on this other person's Amazon account. And then you could do bad things. Now, I know you wouldn't do such a thing, since Ask Leo readers are basically above such things. But again, it serves as an important reminder that we all have a responsibility to know and enter our own information correctly. It's one thing to not get an answer from a site like Ask Leo. But on the other hand, it's something else completely to hand over your online shopping account to a stranger. Alrighty, now the announcement that I mentioned at the beginning of today's Answercast. This Answercast episode, number 160, will be the last for a while as I put the Answercast on hiatus. There'll be more information in issue number 500 of the Ask Leo newsletter in a week or so, but the bottom line is that I'm freeing up some time to work on fewer but better articles and answers, as well as focus on publishing my books. Now, if you have a question about your computer, the internet, or technology, you can still head out to AskLeo.com to search for your answer or ask your question. You can stay connected with Ask Leo by signing up for my newsletter. The weekly Ask Leo newsletter includes more answers and fixes, safety tips, opinions, and even the occasional rant. I always try to make it educational, informative, and perhaps even a little entertaining. I have several books out at AskLeoBooks.com. From backing up to computer maintenance, Ask Leo Books can help. Most of the books include companion online videos accessible once you've purchased the book, as well as digital downloads of any book you've purchased in popular computer and ebook formats. If you take away only one thing from these last 160 Answercasts, let it be this: please back up. Seriously, just do it. I've been plugging this every week because it's so important. Nothing can save you from almost any computer disaster like a proper and recent backup. Finally, I do have to let you know that all of my answers are based on my own personal experience and should be used entirely at your own risk. I don't know you, your abilities, or the specifics of your machine, and those details can make all the difference in the world. The Ask Leo Answercast has been a production of Ask Leo and is copyright 2014. Thanks for listening. I'm Leo Notenboom, and you'll find me back at AskLeo.com.